Late-night shifts at the convenience store were usually uneventful for me. I'd spend the quiet hours restocking shelves, tidying up, and occasionally serving the odd late-night customer. The store was small, located on a quiet street, with a glass front that offered a clear view of the outside world. That night started like any other, with a few regulars stopping by for snacks and cigarettes before heading home. As the clock ticked past midnight, the streets emptied, leaving the store bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. It was around 1 a.m. when I first noticed him. A man standing across the street, partially obscured by the shadows. At first, I thought he was just waiting for someone, or perhaps a lost traveler trying to get his bearings. But he didn't move. He just stood there, watching. I couldn't make out his features clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me, even from that distance. A chill ran down my spine, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. As the minutes dragged on, the man continued to linger. He occasionally moved closer, pacing up and down the sidewalk, always keeping his gaze fixed on the store. I grew increasingly uneasy, trying to focus on my tasks while keeping one eye on him. I considered calling the police, but I hesitated, worried that I might be overreacting to a harmless situation. Around 2 a.m., the man finally crossed the street. My heart rate quickened as he approached the store. He stopped just outside the glass door, staring in at me. He was tall and wore a dark hoodie that obscured his face. I couldn't tell if he was smiling or frowning, but the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the clock, hoping for a customer to come in and break the tension. But the streets were deserted. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching me. I tried to appear busy, organizing the counter and pretending not to notice him, but it was impossible to ignore his presence. Finally, he reached for the door handle. My breath caught in my throat as he slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. He didn't say anything at first, just wandered through the aisles, occasionally glancing over at me. I tried to keep my composure, reminding myself that he hadn't done anything wrong. Yet. But my instinct screamed that something was off. The way he moved, the way he watched me, it all felt wrong. He picked up a bottle of water and brought it to the counter. As I scanned it, I could feel his eyes boring into me. "Quiet night, he said, his voice low and unsettling. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. He paid for the water, but didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, as if waiting for something. "Need anything else?" I asked, hoping to prompt him to leave. He just stared at me, a small, unsettling smile creeping across his face. "Nah, just enjoying the night," he replied cryptically. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I glanced at the clock, willing the time to move faster. He continued to linger, his presence becoming increasingly menacing. I considered calling my manager or security, but the man hadn't technically done anything wrong. He was just there. Minutes felt like hours as he loitered around the store. He occasionally picked up random items, only to put them back down. My unease grew with each passing second. Finally, he walked to the back of the store, disappearing from my line of sight. I let out a shaky breath, relieved to have a moment of reprieve. But then I heard a noise, a soft metallic click, like a door being opened. My heart sank. The back door. It led to a small storage area and a rear exit. Employees used it for taking out the trash, and it was supposed to stay locked. But what if it wasn't? Panic surged through me. If the man got through that door, he could trap me in the back, out of sight, with no one to hear me. I quickly grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. As I pressed the call button, I heard another sound, a soft footstep, coming closer. The line connected, and I whispered urgently, "Hello, I'm at the convenience store on Elm and 5th. There's a man inside, and I think he might be trying to get into the back. Please send someone quickly." As I spoke, I saw a shadow move at the back of the store. The man reappeared, a smile still playing on his lips. He was holding something in his hand. My stomach twisted in fear. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a small metallic object. A set of keys. My keys. I had left them on the counter when I opened up, and now they were in his possession. "Looking for these?" he asked, dangling the keys in the air. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. He had the keys to the store, to the back door, to everything. And I was alone. I kept my phone hidden behind the counter, hoping the dispatcher was listening. "Yeah, thanks. Can I have those back, please?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it wavered. He just smiled wider, shaking his head. "You know, it's not safe for a girl like you to be here all alone," he said, his tone mocking. Anything could happen. My pulse raced and I fought the urge to run. I'm fine. I'm just doing my job," I stammered, inching closer to the phone, hoping to press the speaker button. The man leaned in, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "You sure? You look scared." Before I could respond, he tossed the keys onto the counter. They skittered across the surface, and I grabbed them with trembling hands. He chuckled softly, as if amused by my fear. "Relax," he said, stepping back. "I'm just messing with you." I forced a laugh, trying to defuse the situation. "Yeah, good one," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the phone, the line still open. "Well, I need to finish up here. You should probably head out." He didn't move. For a moment I thought he was going to refuse, but then he shrugged and turned towards the door. Relief washed over me as he walked away, the bell above the door jingling as he left. I watched him through the glass, my body tense, until he disappeared into the night. I quickly locked the door and collapsed behind the counter, my hands shaking. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, asking if I was okay. I assured them I was fine, barely able to hold back tears of relief. They said officers were on their way, and I stayed on the line, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The police arrived within minutes, checking the area and taking my statement. They assured me they would increase patrols and keep an eye out for the man. As they left, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. He hadn't done anything illegal, but his intentions were clear, and he knew where to find me. I tried to go back to my tasks, but every sound made me jump. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and fear. I kept the doors locked, avoiding the windows. The store felt too big, too empty, with too many dark corners. Morning finally arrived, and my shift ended. As I stepped outside into the bright daylight, I felt a wave of relief. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the parking lot, but it was empty. Just as I reached my car, I noticed a small slip of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. My heart skipped a beat as I unfolded it. The note was scrawled in messy handwriting. "Nice store. Maybe I'll see you around again." I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of him. The lot was still empty, but the uneasy feeling in my gut only intensified. I quickly got into my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. As I drove away, I saw him, standing in the shadow of a building across the street, watching me. His face was obscured, but I could feel his gaze following me as I sped off. My mind raced with questions. Had he been there all night, waiting for me to leave? How had he gotten so close without me noticing? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I knew I needed to get away, to find a safe place. But as I drove through the quiet morning streets, the unsettling realization hit me. He knew where I worked, and he knew where to find me. And the worst part, he could be anyone, anywhere, just waiting for his next move. working the night shift at a remote gas station always had a certain eerie charm. The place was isolated, just a small building with a convenience store and a couple of gas pumps surrounded by empty road and open fields. The nearest town was miles away, making the station a quiet, lonely place, especially after midnight when customers were rare. One night around 2 a.m., I was restocking shelves when I noticed something odd. A pack of chips lay on the floor in an aisle I had just organized. I frowned, puzzled. I was sure I hadn't knocked anything over, but I dismissed it as a minor oversight. I picked up the pack and put it back on the shelf, then continued with my work. An hour later, I went to check the security cameras, a routine task I performed several times a night. The screens displayed the usual views: the front counter, the gas pumps, and the aisles. But something caught my eye. The camera covering the back storage area was off. I tried resetting it, but the feed remained blank. It seemed like a technical glitch, but it left me feeling uneasy. The silence of the station felt heavier than usual. Every small noise was amplified in the quiet night, making the creaks of the building and the hum of the lights seem almost ominous. Trying to shake off the creeping paranoia, I decided to do a quick walk around the store. Everything seemed in order until I reached the back room. The door was ajar, and inside I found several boxes that had been neatly stacked, now toppled over. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew I hadn't left the boxes like that. My mind raced through possibilities: a prank, a mistake, or something more sinister. I quickly checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Everything was secure, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. I returned to the front counter, nerves on edge. I glanced at the security monitors again, but now the camera covering the entrance flickered and went dark. My heart raced. 2 cameras failing in one night felt too coincidental. I tried to stay calm, rationalizing that it could just be a technical issue. But then I heard a faint rustling sound above me. I looked up, startled, but saw nothing. The noise stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an unsettling quiet in its wake. I strained to listen for any further sounds, but the station was silent. Every instinct told me that something was off, that I was not alone. As the hours dragged on, I tried to keep busy, but my attention was constantly drawn back to the cameras and the dark, empty store. My nerves were frayed, and I jumped at every small noise. Then, just before dawn, I saw movement on one of the remaining working cameras. A figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the early morning light. I squinted at the screen, trying to make out details, but the image was too grainy. The figure lingered for a moment, then slipped out of view, disappearing into the darkness. I felt a surge of fear. Someone had been watching the station, possibly me, from the shadows. As the first light of dawn broke, I started to relax slightly. The shift was almost over, and soon there would be more people around. I began tidying up, trying to shake off the lingering unease. I headed to the back room to do a final check before leaving. As I reached for the light switch, I noticed the back door was slightly open. It had been locked earlier, I was sure of it. Heart pounding. I approached cautiously, my hand trembling as I pushed the door fully open. The cool morning air rushed in, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the ground, just outside the door, was a set of fresh footprints in the dirt, leading away from the building and disappearing into the nearby field. They were clear, unmistakable, and led into the fog-covered distance. I stood there, staring at the footprints, my mind racing. Someone had been inside the station, possibly watching me the entire time. I looked around, scanning the field and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of anyone. The fog was thick, concealing everything beyond a few feet. A noise from inside the station snapped me back to reality. It was the sound of a door softly closing. I turned, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly walked back into the store, every sense on high alert. As I reached the main area, I noticed the storage room door which I had left open, was now shut. I moved toward the door, my breath shallow and my pulse racing. I reached out, hesitating for a moment, then slowly pushed it open. The room was dark, the faint glow from the outside barely penetrating the gloom. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A shadow, shifting slightly, just behind the stack of boxes at the far end of the room. Someone was there, hiding, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that whoever had left those footprints was still inside the station, and I was alone with them. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, trying not to make a sound. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, of what to do next. But before I could take another step, the shadow moved, and I heard the faintest of sounds, a soft, deliberate click, like the sound of a lock engaging. Frozen in place, I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The realization hit me hard. The person in the shadows wasn't just watching. They were blocking my only exit. I was trapped, alone in the station, with an unknown stranger just feet away. The last bit of dawn's light filtered into the room, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. And as the minutes ticked by, each one more agonizing than the last, I knew that whatever happened next was completely out of my control. It was my first night on the job as a security guard at a large office building downtown. The building was sprawling, with long hallways and dimly lit rooms. I arrived early to get familiar with the layout and to meet Mike, the guard I was supposed to relieve, but Mike wasn't there. Instead, Dan, the night supervisor, greeted me with a forced calmness. Mike called in sick, Dan said, looking somewhat flustered. "You're on your own tonight. Just stick to the patrol routes and keep an eye on the cameras. It's usually pretty quiet." I nodded, feeling a knot of unease. Dan quickly ran me through the basics of monitoring the cameras, the patrol routes, and emergency protocols before heading out. Left alone in the security office, I settled into the chair, watching the monitors. The building was mostly empty, save for a few late-night workers. Everything seemed normal until around midnight when I noticed something peculiar. On one of the cameras, a shadow moving down the 12th floor hallway. It was fleeting, just a blur. I switched to another camera, but the shadow was gone. My unease grew as the shadow reappeared on a different floor. I checked the logs, but no one had signed in or out after hours. Trying to reach Dan on the radio, I got no response. Determined to investigate, I grabbed my flashlight and set out on patrol. The building was silent, with only the hum of the air system breaking the stillness. On the 12th floor, I found an open door to the maintenance room. Inside, there were security reports detailing the building's layout and a small, unmarked key. The sight made my stomach churn. This was more than just a simple break-in. As I returned to the security office, Dan's voice crackled over the radio. "Security office now." I rushed back to the office. Dan was standing outside, looking pale. On the desk was a note scrawled in a hurried hand. "You shouldn't have come here. Leave now, while you still can." We reviewed the camera footage, but the intruder remained elusive, always just out of sight. The monitors flickered, and for a moment, a figure appeared on the 12th floor, staring directly into the camera before the feed cut out. Realizing the severity of the situation, we decided to call the police. As we tried to leave for the lobby, we heard a door slam somewhere above us. The building seemed alive with unsettling noises, footsteps echoing in the hallways, and the faint creak of doors opening and closing. We reached the main lobby, only to find the exit door locked. Panic set in. We searched desperately for another way out. As we headed for the stairwell, I saw the man from the monitors at the end of the 12th floor hallway. He was standing still, watching us. Dan and I ran up the stairs to the 12th floor. But when we got there, the man was gone. The hallway was empty. We were cornered with no clear way out. As we searched the floor, the lights flickered, adding to the tension. The police arrived, but the man had vanished. They searched the building thoroughly, but there was no sign of him. He had somehow evaded capture, slipping away through the shadows, or perhaps having planned his escape meticulously. Dan and I provided statements to the police, recounting everything we had seen. Exhausted and frustrated, we watched as the officers conducted their search. But despite their best efforts, the intruder remained at large. The building eventually returned to its usual quiet routine, but the sense of vulnerability lingered. The man had been elusive, slipping through our grasp and disappearing into the night. The security measures were reviewed and reinforced, but the unsettling reality was clear: the intruder had managed to outsmart us, and the fear of his return never truly faded. As I left the building at the end of my shift, I glanced back, the sense of unease still hanging over me. Just then, I noticed a shadow move past a window on one of the upper floors. It had to be the intruder. I don't know how he managed to escape, but clearly he wasn't done.